Today's meeting is going to be focused on several critical emerging components of digital health that have come about over the last 3 years with the unprecedented medical technology response to the COVID virus and how it's now precipitated into this new digital health reset. So as the tree bends in the wind, sometimes it snaps and sometimes it sways back to center point. We've seen over the last year now this swaying back to a center point, not entirely, but somewhat. And we've seen the infrastructure for healthcare delivery at a very deep and very fundamental way being changed. We saw it as a reaction in March of 20 and going through the rest of 20 and 21. And now we've seen it as a response with new health plans providing virtual first technologies and services, with companies like Transcarent providing these sorts of using traditional MSA infrastructure, but now digitizing a lot of the delivery where providers are being paid upfront and not have to fight for claims dollars. Now reinventing how healthcare delivery will look, not just today, but over the next 10 years. And very much like what we saw with managed care in 1990, where it was a small fraction of the US healthcare system, by 2000, it was almost the entire healthcare system. We're seeing now this digital infrastructure being put into place very quietly, but nonetheless, very massively to provide digital services, not just on healthcare delivery, but also clinical trials. Decentralized clinical trials, which was a buzzword that came about with the pandemic, is now very much becoming more of something that life science companies, academic medical centers, CROs are investing in heavily, and we're seeing that grow tremendously as well. Remote patient monitoring, like what we see with Peter Nemi's company, Recovery Response, we're seeing now that the ability to rehab at home is very much an actualization, is very much a reality. And so that kind of modeling that we're seeing build is something that won't happen overnight. So it's not a one-year revolution, but it is a revolution. It is something that over the next 10 years, that sort of digitization of healthcare delivery and life sciences, a lot of what Patrick just talked about in his opening keynote is being built, is happening. And we're seeing some of the seeds of that already come to fruition today. To talk more about that is our next panel with Sara Chokshi and Juan Jiménez and Sabrina Runbeck. And they're going to be talking a little bit about another key theme of the meeting today, which includes things like digital therapeutics, decentralized clinical trials, and other types of really important issues that are rising in digital healthcare, but it also diversity, equity, and inclusion. As we've seen digitization grow in healthcare, starting with a lot of what happened in the dot-com 90s, we saw new efforts to embolden and to empower clinicians and providers around the world to bring patients digital technologies and allow them to improve outcomes, accessibility, and affordability through digital interventions. And part of what we're seeing now are those models being built where it empowers patients to empower themselves. And so we're going to hear a little bit about that now with Sara and Juan and Sabrina. So please welcome our next panel to talk about health equity and digital health.
Thanks everyone for joining us today, and we'll just do a brief, quick introduction. Sarah, would you like to start?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I'm Sara Chokshi. I am the Director of Research here at HITLAB. I'm a public health sociologist by training, but I've always worked in very applied settings, originally focused on mental health services, and for almost 10 years now, exclusively in digital health. So excited to be here.
Well, I'm Juan Jiménez, co-founder and CEO of AccurKardia. First of all, I want to thank HITLAB for the invitation. I'm so happy to be back on campus. Last time I was here was 14 years ago, so I'm so happy to be back today. We co-founded AccurKardia in a nutshell to save lives. Currently, there are different amazing devices, amazing information being generated by consumer, clinical, inpatient, outpatient devices, but that information is not properly analyzed or managed by the current workflows. And in AccurKardia, we have built the platform that is able to ingest device agnostic ECG signal coming from different devices and prepared in a way that is useful for physicians and clinicians and reimbursable by several payers.
Great. I'm Sabrina Runbeck. My background is in cardiothoracic surgery as a PA. When I was really burned out, working 80 hours per week, and I know one of the big issues in healthcare nowadays is staff turnover, and we're losing providers and nurses left and right. So I went back to my root in neuroscience and public health, and really thinking about how do we optimize the way that we deliver care? How do we engage with our staff so they're not leaving us? And how do we use technology to better bridge the gap? And now as a director of people and clinical outcome for MRG Health, that's our focus, to reduce staff work struggles and then improve patient satisfaction. And on the back end, we can actually increase profitability for our providers. And so one of the definitely thing that's close to me is access to care. We know on average, clinicians are seeing about 25 patients a day. So if you think about an 8-hour workday, that's less than 15 minutes per patient. And no wonder anybody who go to subspecialty and primary care physicians, they're waiting for weeks to be seen. And how would that impact us as individuals, seeing our family have to wait for care? And so that's one thing I would love for you guys to discuss. While we're using digital technology, what are you seeing as a truly barrier to those access to care issues?
First of all, I believe that technology is the only way to be able to alleviate the access of care in America. There are 15 million Americans living in medically underserved areas, and 99 million, close to 30% of the population, living in healthcare worker shortage areas. So by recruiting more clinicians or doctors by itself is not going to solve the problem. So first of all, I believe that clinical workflows and standard of care need to include digital health solutions being developed by traditional healthcare companies, pharma companies, but also early stage companies like ours. I believe that that is essential to be able to provide information that doesn't add more burden for clinicians, but help them in their overall care of patients.
Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, just to piggyback on what you said, Juan, I think burden is the key issue. And I think it's a key issue, as you know, thankfully we're talking about a lot now, and I'm sure we're going to talk a lot about that today and for the next 3 days about burden and burnout and reducing clinician burnout. But, you know, patients are burned out too, you know, even if they are nearby logistically a care provider, even if they can get an appointment, you know, that's not necessarily even the last mile. Someone with a chronic condition has to attend to their health a lot and sort of need to be seen a lot. How can we make it easier to be a patient? How can we, you know, keep them at home as much as possible? And I think that's what I love about Accucardia and the possibility that we have with something like Accubeat is, you know, it's one of the solutions that lets us start to think very realistically. How can we keep patients at home where they're comfortable and not sort of pile on, you know, the burden that is sometimes, you know, being a patient with a chronic disease.
Exactly. And I think that's why, like, I run a podcast show for the past 2.5 years. And then the big thing to highlight is, what are the innovations? How are we celebrating medicine nowadays, instead of figuring out or trying to put a negative spin on what are we not doing right? And so that also come into how are we using clinical trials and really be able to leverage wearables such as Accubeat to help our cardiac patients. That's part of my natural background. So Juan, would you like to expand?
Sure, let me give some background on Accubeat. Accubeat is one of our platforms for Accucardia platform to perform clinical analysis on short-term electrocardiogram tracings, coming from clinical devices such as an event monitor, a Holter, or even a consumer wearable device such as the Apple Watch, Fitbit, and Samsung Watch. We believe that besides designing clinical studies and trials, with diversity and inclusion in its design, bringing different population for background, gender, identity, as well as ethnic background and socioeconomical background as well. That is good by itself, but given that there are certain groups in society that have less flexibility in the work schedules, that we need to bring clinical solutions that be able to get that information needed from a trial at home or at work. So we reduce the burden of participants going to sites for multiple testing and multiple interviews and reducing the compliance rate. So AccuraBeat, we have proposing using AccuraBeat to perform QT and QTC monitoring, and QT and QTC monitoring is very important for many clinical trials, but nowadays in the new era of the immune therapy drugs, we need to monitor that not only in the trial, but also post administering those drugs. And AccuraBeat provides that, help using the consumer device and providing automated analysis on that information and be able to provide that in a way to a physician that doesn't add more burden to their own workflows.
Sarah?
Yeah, and just to build on that from a research perspective, the reason I think I'm up here is because we, HITLAB and AccuCardia worked together recently on a study of AccuraBeat. And I think the other piece that is important to kind of recognize is, the study that we did was the first in what will, be a series leading up to a, more super robust clinical trial. But these studies offer us the opportunity to look at how these devices are used in real life with real people. In this case, it was our first step. So we're using an Apple Watch to collect the data to, see, all right, does this work how we think it's going to work? And, amen, it did. But it also gave us a chance as researchers to look at, I think often what can be overlooked, but it's going to be really important to that last mile is like, well, what's it like for that patient to put the watch on for themselves? And do they understand how it needs to be placed? How are they being onboarded to the technology? I think more and more we have the technology to do what we want to do. That's not the problem. It's really hammering out, what does this look like for somebody who, isn't super savvy with technology, who's very busy, doesn't have a lot of flexibility in their life to, attend to their data collection 2 hours a day, those sorts of things. So it was a great opportunity, I think, to do what I think is some of the most important last mile work, which is, what does this look like for patients and for clinicians who might not be used to incorporating, technology into their practice in such a way quite yet.
Exactly. I think that being said, it leads to a good point of if we're creating devices just for our own knowledge, or is it really for patient? Because if we're creating something that the patient don't know how to use, or they won't use at all, then it's pointless. And we also know nowadays there are a lot of devices out on the market. Perhaps one person who has a blood pressure cuff at home have an iWatch for their monitoring EEG, and other people have sleep apnea. Each of them have a different app and they don't communicate with each other. So it can be very challenging for our patient population at the same time. And so that being said, I think a big movement is all about how do we take care of the patient the best way we can. And most of these is because we know by study, 50% of the elderly population have AFib undetected. And for the arrhythmia issues with QT prolongation, that has a lot of drug interactions and then cause people to go into the hospital using emergency room. And so when we consider in population health and adaptability, how can we really be able to create these wearable devices or technology that are affordable and at the same time easy for people to use?
So I'd like to, in terms of interconnectivity, easy to integrate, innovators and new technologies need to assess the current workflows and create a product that integrates with the status quo. And in AccuraCardia, what they have done is we have built an API-based product in which our product can be interconnected with different remote patient monitoring software currently available. It can interact with the EHR system. It can interact with different software used by different practice and clinics. So that way we can help and avoid one situation that you mentioned, that adding more products that create more burden for both patients, clinicians, and payers. And in terms of one point that I'd like to add as well is regarding the diversity and inclusion from the get-go that I forgot to mention in the previous statement. It is that as HiTLAB being a diverse company from the get-go, 99% of our team come from underrepresented groups in the nation. In the first clinical study, building clinical validation, we wanted to design the study with the help of HITLAB and the SUNY Downstate team that represented those groups that we want to target. So that's something that also we wanted to highlight as part of the study.
Yeah, I think it was really great to partner with SUNY Downstate for this because of where it's located and because of the team. We had the opportunity to put action where words. I mean, it's wonderful to hear more and more people who are building devices, people who are building systems to think about diversity and inclusion. But this was action. We were really able to recruit a really diverse sample and feel like we were, being very representative when we're saying, we're in the right direction. So yeah, it's great. I'm thankful for that because it's hard to do alone, but to have multiple teams who are dedicated and committed to doing that. Yeah, made it great.
Yeah, I appreciate you for being here and then to talk about this big topic, and definitely would not be able to really discuss in detail in 15 minutes, and then definitely a longer conversation to go. I appreciate you guys for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sabrina.
Thank you, Sabrina. Good job.